Hello, dear friends. Welcome to today's talk. I call these talks Ideas for Life. And today I'd like to talk about students of the seer of Lublin, who's called the Hozeh of Lublin, Rabbi Yitzhak of Lublin, who is buried in the old cemetery of Lublin, which you can visit till this day. He was born in 1745 and died in 1815. I really want to talk more about his students than him. I will just say that they say that on his deathbed, he said that Poland, of course, Poland stopped being a country after the third partition in Poland, somewhere around 1797. But supposedly on his deathbed, he said in 100 years, Poland will become a nation again. And this was actually reported in the non-Jewish newspapers because they were surprised that they heard this famous Jewish rabbi had said this in Lublin, and this is really what happened. And supposedly it was actually reported also 100 years later when it actually happened after the Second World War. The Hozeh brings Hasidism from eastern Poland to central Poland. And specifically his students do so also. And I want to talk about three students of his who were very unusual in the panorama of Hasidic life. And that's specifically Yakov Yitzhak, the Yehudi HaKadosh, who's called the Holy Yid, the Holy Jew, and his student Simha Bunim Przysucha, and his colleague Mendel of Kotsk. And I'll just bring a few things from each one, because each one, of course, could be a talk by itself, which was not my goal today. I just want to bring some ideas from each one of them. But something that they have in common, the Yehudi Kadosh, Simcha Bunim, and Kotsk, they were slightly renegade, slightly different than the regular Hasidic movement who was trying to popularize the movement. There was a certain elitism about them, a certain, I would say, even way of looking at the world which was very cynical almost, and I would call a way of truth with a capital T. I will actually start with something that the Hozeh of Lublin said, which can understand then where his students were coming from. The Hozeh says about, he says, Yesh tzadikim, there are righteous people, and of course the rabbis of the Hasidic movement were referred to as tzadikim in the early generations because their students were called Hasidim. So you couldn't call the rabbis Hasidim, you had to call them something else, so they're called the righteous ones, the tzadikim. Yesh tzadikim, there are righteous ones, that they want to bring people back into Teshuvah, they want to make Jews return to Judaism. Ve'enam chosheshim al tzar Yisrael, but it doesn't bother them the fact that some of these Jews will have to pay the price of becoming religious. And we know that sometimes becoming religious, there's different prices. You could lose your job if you had to work on Shabbat. You could run into problems with your family if they're not under that type of understanding. V'yesh mehem so there are certain tzaddikim, he says, there are righteous rabbis who they want to create a mass movement of teshuvah, but they don't look at the person that they're trying to bring back to wonder, is this good for them or not good for them? They figured that the ends justifies the means, and let's just do it. I would go even a step further, and I would say there's some people who want to be machzir b'tshuva. They like doing tshuva because it empowers them. They can change people's lives. But that he doesn't say, so I'm not going to take it that far. But he's just saying they don't realize the trouble and the price that sometimes the people have to pay. And he says then there are other type of tzaddikim, that they just want to imitatio Dei, they want to imitate God. And just like God wants to do good, they want to do good. And so what they do is they just keep doing good to people. And they help people out. And just by their example, other people want to be like them and want to do teshuvah and want to be like them, observant Jews like them. Just like Mordechai in the time of Esther, where people wanted to become Jewish because they saw who Mordechai was, because they couldn't believe all the wonderful things that he was able to do. He says that's a real tzaddik, who just imitates God in his love for people, and people are so overwhelmed by that they want to be like that too. Somebody who works like a magnet, and not somebody who works by coercion. So that's Yakov Yitzhak, the Hozeh, the seer of Lublin. Now I want to bring some things from his students. And let's start with one or two things from who was called the Heiliger Yid, which was the holy Jew, Hayudi Kadosh, that was his actually connotation, Yakov Yitzhak, who was his student, who was born in 1766 and died in 1814, so that really most of his life was parallel to the Hozeh, the seer of Lublin. Now the Yehudi Kadosh believed that the service of God is something very personal. It's not really something somebody else can teach you. You have to discover it for yourself. People can help you with ideas, but in the end of the road, in the end of the day, you have to discover it within yourself. So the Holy Yehudi says in the collection of his writings, Tiferet Yehudi, Kol HaKlalim, all the various principles that people write and talk about in the service of God, they're not really principles. All the rules that people create of how to be to service God, to worship God in the right way, they're not really rules. And even this rule is not a rule. Okay? Again, all the rules that people come up with about how to serve God are not really rules, and even this rule is not a rule. That's Tiferet HaYehudi by what's called HaYehudi HaKadosh. And now I want to go to his student, Simha Bunim Przysucha, who actually became the rabbi of Przysucha after the Yehudi HaKadosh passed away. Simha Bunim was actually born at the same time, 1765, a year before Yakov Yitzhak, but he dies later in 1827. And in the years after the Yehudi HaKadosh passed away, Simha Bunim is the Rabbi of Przysucha in Poland. Simha Bunim is the same type of thinker, very critical, sometimes ironic, and of his generation, a little bit renegade, a little bit wondering, there's a famous statement, we'll get to it, of course. Okay, Simha Bunim. Simha Bunim says, and this is quoted in a book called Emet Ve'emunah, page 135. He says, the truth is, with my abilities, with my spiritual abilities, I actually have the ability to resuscitate the dead. But actually, I find it much more satisfying to resuscitate the living. Because it's bringing the living back to life, which is going to really make an impression. If you can teach human beings how to maximize their lives, then all of a sudden you might find that you're changing the world. I'm going to assume these things are self-explanatory, and I'm going to go on to the next. Excuse me. In a book called Siach Sarfei Kodesh on Parshat Toldot, also brought the name of Simha Bunim Przysucha, where he talks about Esau. Remember, Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. And Esau, after Jacob took his blessing, he said, Yikarvu yemei eval avi, let the days of my father's life be over, and then I will kill my brother Jacob. So the Midrash is very negative about Esau, calls Esau the wicked Esau Harasha, and has a lot of negative things. So Simha Bunim has something to say about Esau. It says Esau was a man, a hunter of the field. In the name of the Simha Bunim Przysucha, of blessed memory, he used to say, don't think that Esau looked like a very down-to-earth, banal peasant. No. Esau? Are you kidding? He used to wear a white gown He used to teach Torah at Sudah Shlishit, at the third meal on Shabbat. This was Esav. He was like a very holy Rebbe, a very holy leader. And the time is going to come in the future that Esav will sit in front of everybody and nobody will stop him because they will think he's such a righteous person. Look at the way he's dressed. Look at the way he teaches Torah. Look at the way he says Tehillim. Look at the way that he prays and davens. He's such a holy man. So Esav will sit at the head of the table until the Holy One, blessed be he, by himself will have to throw Esav out because everybody will think that he's so holy. And if in the world to come this will happen, in a world which is a world of truth, even there nobody will understand that Esav is wicked. Even more so in this world, which is full of wickedness, that people don't understand that there are a lot of Esavs that are masquerading as holy and righteous people. I couldn't have said it better myself. Simcha Bunim of Przysucha. Another statement of Simcha Bunim of Przysucha from a book called Ramatzaim Sofim, chapter 8, page 105. He says, and I'll translate it into English because the Hebrew is Yiddishized. When there are a lot of people, when there's a large mass of people, like on Friday night, on Shabbat, who come to listen to me in the synagogue, it's very difficult for me to teach Torah. Because in the end of the day, you have to teach Torah to everyone according to who they are. So it's really hard to teach the masses. Everybody has to receive the Torah according to who they are as a human being, and according to their soul, and according to their nature. Simcha Bunim. Another famous statement of Simcha Bunim. This is from a book called Kol Mevaser, Part 3, Menachem Av Gimel. The Reb Simcha Bunim used to say, if I had the possibility, I would annul all of the fast days in the Jewish calendar, except for two. One of them would be Yom Kippur, and the other one would be the 9th of Av, the Tisha B'Av. Because on Yom Kippur, when we're standing in judgment over our lives, who can possibly eat anyhow? And on the 9th of Av, when we think about the tragedy that befell Jerusalem and the temple, who would want to eat on a day like that? Again, he says, if I had the possibility, I would get rid of all the fast days except for two. One is Yom Kippur, and one is Tisha B'Av. Because on Yom Kippur, when you're standing and trying to save your life before God, how can you think about food? And on Tisha B'Av, after the tragedy that befell us as a people, who could possibly eat? One more of Simcha Bunim, just to understand the type of person he was. As he was on his deathbed, he heard his wife in the other room crying. And he asked her to come over. And he said, why are you crying? Don't you realize that my whole life I have prepared myself for this moment of my death? Meaning all of our lives, we try to fulfill ourselves as human beings to our best. So, if we can do that, there's nothing to cry about. As it says in Mishlei, in the last chapter of Proverbs about the woman of valor, the woman who does everything to fulfill herself as a human being before God, Vatischak liyom acharon, she can laugh on her last day.